who reluctantly got accepted for 2 talks, a tutorial and a talk. Randy Coulman from Key Technology on automating Smalltalk builds.
Hello, everybody hear me in the back all right? I'll try to use the microphone, and I might move away from it a little bit here. Automating builds is kind of one of my hobby horses, so I talk about it a lot, and my coworkers can testify that I talk about it a lot. We've been doing automated builds since probably within the first year after I got to E. We just kind of started automating things, and so this is just kind of half how-to, half experience report on how we automate our Smalltalk builds. I'll give you a little outline of the talk here. I'll do a little bit of introduction. I'll run through a quick example, talk a little bit about what cruise control is and how we do Smalltalk builds with it, and some references, and then time for questions and answers at the end. So who am I? As you know, I'm Randy Coulman. I work for Key Technology. Most of you are probably familiar with Key. Those who aren't, we build big food sorting machines. And so we've got custom hardware doing real-time sorting, and all of our UIs are touchscreen interfaces on the machines, and all the UI code is in Smalltalk. We've got the real-time sorting code is in C, and we've got some embedded hardware that runs some C++ software. So multi-language development, which means that we can't use just the Smalltalk tools to do our build automation and that kind of thing. So we've been looking at more cross-platform kind of tools for that sort of thing. Everything runs Linux. Probably 60% or so of our code base is in Smalltalk. It's a very good language for us. We've really enjoyed working in it. So why would you want to automate your builds? Hopefully most of you know why. My favorite reasons are because I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And it seems to be the time you make the most mistakes is when you have the pressure to get a release out. And if you've got a build with a lot of manual steps in it, you're going to screw it up at just the wrong time. And so the more you can automate, the better off you are. Because if all you got to do is push a button and you get a reliable release out the other end, your life is much easier. You don't get the late night phone calls and that kind of thing. It's very nice. A few other. So what is continuous integration? Continuous integration is kind of the next step up from automated builds. Continuous integration is one of the practices that Kent Beck introduced when he talked about XP in the late 90s, early 2000s. On the first XP project, they were actually using Visual Age, I believe, with NB. And so what they would do is every time they had a change to check in, they'd publish a version, go to an integration machine, integrate it into the main code, and then publish that. And it's very kind of NB-specific workflow where you can kind of publish code, but it's not actually on the main line, and you go to another machine and kind of merge it all together. But the idea is that rather than waiting for a big bang integration at the end of the project, you're integrating all the time. The kind of philosophy there is if something is painful and hard to do and causes you grief, then do it a lot more often because A, you get better at it, and B, you streamline it so you don't have so many problems. And with integration especially, the less you have to integrate, the better off you are. It's easier. So you do integration all the time, continuously. That NB-specific workflow, when people were starting to learn about XP, didn't really translate to the kind of more conventional version control tools like Subversion, CVS, those kind of tools. Branching and merging is a real pain. So, doing a publish from your workspace and then integrating on another machine was kind of tedious. And so people started inventing tools for doing this, where you check in your changes and you have a tool that sees the changes, does the build, tells you about it. So I'll abbreviate continuous integration CI here. Why would you want to use a CI tool? Well, one thing is it's automatic. You don't have to do anything. You check in your changes and you automatically get a build out the other end. It's always running, so you don't forget to do something. It's kind of the first step in making sure that your software runs somewhere other than the developer's box. Typically with a CI tool, you've got a build server running somewhere, and kind of the most common mistake people make is, oh, I forgot to check that file into version control, or I forgot to check that package into version control in Smalltalk. And so having this build running on another machine means that you catch those mistakes real quick. And again, it eliminates yet another manual step. You don't have to do this manual integration process on another machine. There are people that argue that you shouldn't use continuous integration tools. The most vocal I know of is a guy by the name of Jim Shore. Very smart guy, very nice guy, but his kind of philosophy is if you use one of these tools, I mean, you're checking in your code, and you might check in broken code, and if you don't know it's broken yet because the build hasn't run yet, then somebody else might check out the code and has the code that's not working. That's a valid complaint. For me, the benefits kind of outweigh that. Another one is that it lets you ignore the case when your builds are getting slower. You kind of ignore that because it's running kind of asynchronously. You're not noticing how slow your builds are getting really. Whereas if you have to manually do the integration, run all your tests, you realize, hey, this is taking too long, I'm wasting too much time, we need to speed this up. And so you kind of, that feedback is muted a little bit. And another reason why he says not to use these kind of tools is because if the whole team isn't on board with having this kind of automated build thing, the tool can be used to kind of bludgeon your teammates into submission, which sometimes is kind of a nice thing to do, but really it doesn't work very well, so probably not a good idea. So we have chosen to use a continuous integration tool in our shop. Like I said, we have multiple languages, and the way we have our build set up is that we can check in any change to any part of our code, whether it's C, C++, Bash script, expect script, graphics, Smalltalk code, anything. And within, depending on how long the various builds take, we've got some builds that run on our hardware and they're a little bit slow. We get basically an ISO image out the other end that we convert on a CD and take it to our shop and put on a machine and ship it. It's kind of, we don't have a one-button build everything. We have kind of, I like to picture it as feeder streams feeding into the main river, and at the other end, when you hit the ocean, you get this ISO image that you can ship. And if all your tests are passing and you've got a complete set of tests, you have what Scrum likes to call potentially shippable software at the end of every check-in, essentially. And so we've kind of built up our automation over time. This isn't something you just start a project and get it all done within a week or two. You kind of learn what you need and build it up over time. And so in the last, it's been 6 years probably since we started doing this, we've got a fairly sophisticated system now. In fact, one of the people that we just hired about 6 months ago says that one of the reasons he joined us was because of our build system. He just thought it was really cool. So we're pretty proud of it, maybe overly so, but we're pretty proud of it. So let me just run through a little example of what cruise control does. On this machine, I've downloaded the cruise control binary release, which is available. I'll give you URLs for everything at the end. And install that. I made one little patch to something that I'll explain when I get to it. But otherwise, it's basically out of the box. I've got a little mail server running on my machine so I can get build notification emails locally. I want to thank Boris Popov, who's not here, for suggesting ArgoSoft mail server. Works great for this. And that's basically what I've got running on here. I've got Ant installed. We started using Ant for our build scripts early on because it was one of the things that cruise control supported. Now it's got a lot more support. And we've been using it for 6 years, so we kind of started early with it. You can use other things to do your builds with. We happen to use Ant scripts, so I've got that installed on here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to VisualWorks. And like Alan said, I was doing 2 presentations here. I kind of submitted 2 because I want to make sure I had one accepted, and he did both. So what I've done is I've kind of merged my presentations a little bit. What I did is I got cruise control running on this machine, and then as I was developing my other presentation, I check in my changes and get automated builds out of it. And so what I've got set up here is some unpublished code that's ready to, it's passing the test locally, and I'm ready to commit it and get a build out of it. So I'm going to do that, show off another little tool that we've got called Select Unpublished Changes. It automatically selects all the packages that have unpublished changes, and then you can just publish them. We don't use bundles. I don't want to get into that debate here today. So I think what I did here, those of you who were in my fit tutorial yesterday will know what this means. So I'm just going to put a little comment on these and publish them. Okay. And what's going to happen shortly is you'll see an email notification pop up saying that, oh, my build was successful. Please help me be successful. It should be. So what's going on in the background here, I'll get into it in a little more detail, but basically cruise control is sitting in the background and it's watching both my store repository and my subversion repository for any changes. And you can watch, there's support for all kinds of different version control systems, even watching for files to change on disk. And when it sees changes, it'll kick off a build and run the build and then report the results when it's done. That's kind of the basic process. And that's how it works. So just see how this is going here. And there's a thing called a quiet period where, you know, if you're publishing and it sees a change within a certain window, it's thinking, oh, he's still publishing, I better wait until he's done. So it's just waiting for a second, and it's going to start up in a second to start building here. And we can kind of watch the log. This log is very verbose. There we go. So now it's kicking off the build. You can kind of see the windows popping up as it's going. I'm not doing a headless build here. So. And I'll talk about all the steps we do to build Smalltalk code here. I've actually, in here, I've also got builds for basically creating a base development image so that every time I change kind of the core set of tools that I use, I get a new base development image that I can make a new working image from if I want to. I've got another one for, I've got another one for building up a story image that I use for some of the cruise control stuff. Yeah, my mail's going to fail since it starts on. So now if I go to my mail program and check my mail, I got a build. And I actually had an exception in here because it was trying to talk to a server that I didn't have running to run a certain set of tests. All my unit tests passed, and I've actually got it set up so that I've got running fitness acceptance tests in the background. And I told it not to fail the build if those fail. I don't really want to do that normally, but in this case I did. So it didn't actually fail the build because all my unit tests passed. And this is telling me that. So I get this email from Cruise Control saying, hey, I built this thing, here's the errors that you got, and here's your test results, and here's what actually changed in the build, so you can kind of get a history of what happened. And we actually archive these emails, and we've got history going back for years and years, so we can see, when did I do that? And search your mail and find it. It's kind of nice. There's more tools that Cruise Control provides as well. The one minor patch I made to the distributed Cruise Control is I modified the style sheet that generates this email so that I get a version number in here, because normally that's not there. Yeah, screen resolution isn't the greatest, so just minimize this a little bit so you can actually see this stuff. So down here at the bottom, I just made one minor little tweak to the style sheet. I need to actually submit that back as a patch to Cruise Control so that it's in the base. Okay, so that's essentially how it works. There's more tools to it than that as well. Okay, so that's my example. So what is Cruise Control? Cruise Control was released open source by ThoughtWorks back in 2001, so it's been around for a while. It's been a fairly long-lived open source project. It's written in Java. It's kind of Java-centric in some ways, but it's really kind of expanded beyond those roots lately. There are versions of it for .NET and Ruby as well. Those came along long after we started using it, so we've kind of, inertia has set in, and we kind of stick with what we know, and it works. I mean, it's working for us, so there's no reason to change. It's got a very pluggable architecture, so all the different steps of the build process I talked about are all pluggable. You can do those steps in different ways, and Cruise Control really just provides the tools and the framework for that, and it doesn't really specify how you need to do things. There's kind of three main components to it. The first is the build loop that I've talked about, and I'll talk about in a little more detail in a minute. There's a JSP-based reporting application that I will also show you. I'll show you that right now. So this is actually the JSP-based reporting application. It shows you all the projects I've got on here. This bottom one, Connect 4, is actually the one that comes out of the box with binary distribution. It's kind of an example project, so you can see how to set up a Cruise Control project and what it looks like. I just left it in there. But these top four are all ones that I've done. This Freedom Account thing is my example for the Fit tutorial. And like I said, these are all little image builder type scripts that I've got. By the way, thank you, Arden, for posting those scripts a little while ago, because it's been really handy for this. He posted some scripts on his blog for automatically building up images, and we use them for a bunch of stuff. We've adapted them some. And I've been told that James actually wrote those originally, so I've gone over them very carefully to make sure that there's no changes.
They work as well as my code.
That's why I've gone over them very carefully.
They have just as many unit tests?
Yes. They all pass.
So I can go into any one of my projects here, like my Freedom Account one, and I can see a list of all the builds that have happened, and you can see none of them have failed. There's a bunch of tabs up here. This, you'll notice, looks a lot like the build email. And it's actually generated from the same Excel file. But I can get more details about my tests. Here's all the tests that ran. And notice I had the SU2 tests in there, so they also ran as part of the build. It runs every test in the image. I'll talk about that in a little more detail. You can look at the raw log file if you want to. It has some metrics. We don't use that much, but they're there. So you can see that all my builds have passed in this project. I switched to another one. I actually did have a failure at some point. Not that one. One of them failed. There. Here you can see I didn't get a build label, so that's actually a failed build. And that's actually because I had a syntax error in my build file in that particular case. But it'll fail the build if your tests fail and that sort of thing as well. And there's a few other tabs here, but you can jump between projects. And basically, this will show you the history of all your projects. There's a newer kind of reporting application that they've put into Cruise Control recently. I'm kind of torn on whether I like it or not, but it's called Dashboard. And so what it just kind of shows you is all the builds you've got defined. You can wave over them and get tooltips. You can click on one, or you can actually go look at your builds, see when they passed, whether it was recently or a while ago. You can dive into details on any particular build, on the Freedom account one, for example. And you can see, here was the modifications in there. I can click on this. Yeah, so there's my commit comments, so I know what changed. And there's my build log. I can download and look at that. There's my tests, and look at that. So it's kind of the same information in a slightly prettier format. I'm not sure this is as usable as the other one in some ways, and otherwise I like it better. So you kind of pick and choose which one you like. You can get them both running with Cruise Control. And so you get this basically intranet-based, web-based build status that you can go and look at, as well as the emails you get. So those are kind of the three main parts of Cruise Control. Obviously, the interesting one is the build loop, but you kind of want to see what happens with your builds. Initially, when we started using Cruise Control for our non-Smalltalk code, and Travis Griggs, who worked with us at the time, wanted the same thing for the Smalltalk code, and so he built kind of roll his own. And it was pretty good. It worked well. He figured out all the hard parts for me, which was nice, and got it working, but it didn't have some of this reporting stuff that we were kind of getting used to having. And so I ended up changing what he had done to make it work with Cruise Control. So let's talk a little bit more about how the build loop works. So like I said, it's going to check for relevant changes, and there's all sorts of plugins for all sorts of different version control systems. And now, including Store, in the latest release of Cruise Control, I actually submitted a patch to make this work with Store. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a minute, but they actually accepted that into the project. And the last release, 2.7.2, actually has that in there. So you download Cruise Control 2.7.2 and you've got support for Store in there, which I think is kind of cool. They pulled that in really quickly, actually. I submitted it and they had it integrated later that day. I was really surprised by that, but it was kind of nice. Then you do your build, which would be, compiling if you had to compile. Smalltalk, we don't have to do. Running the test, packaging, whatever you do. In our builds, we typically check out the code, do whatever kind of build tests we need, run all our tests, and then we build Debian packages, and that's what we put on our CDs. We just use the Debian install tools to install our packages. And so pretty much every build we have produces a Debian package, then we have one last build that builds up our installer CD out of all that stuff. And so you can look at file system changes, all the different version control pointers. You can build various ways. Ant was kind of the first one they implemented, which is why we've been using it, because it was kind of one of the only options early on. But there might be one for Rake, although that might just be the Ruby version of Cruise Control. You can just shell out to any kind of a script, all sorts of things like that. So it's fairly flexible in terms of how you do your builds. We typically just have a controlling Ant script. A lot of our C and C++ code has make files, so we just call make from Ant, and that's how that works. And then at the end, you publish results. And again, there's a whole bunch of plugins for that. You can send emails. I think there's a Jabber notifier, so you can have a talk client listening to that. There's the RSS feeds. People have hooked stuff up to little build automation, put a little flashing light up on the top of their cube, and so when the build fails, you get this red flashing light, so everybody knows the build is broken. People have written about this. They use like X10 controllers and stuff like that to do it. That's kind of fun. There's a little traffic light goes green or red when your builds pass. So there's some really fun stuff you can do with it. Like I said, there's plugins for all of that, and there's a few other steps that I kind of glossed over a little bit. All the configuration is done by XML, or some of us in our group, not all of us, call it X1L. It's because on the XP mailing list for a while, somebody subscribed there and they had a profanity filter on their mail server. And so somebody would use a bad word in the forum, and everybody get this notification, hey, somebody used a bad word here. And so people kind of started adopting the I-18N convention for their bad words. So there's SGT and so on and so forth, people were writing. And so a couple of us on our team call this X1L. It's a bad word. We have others that don't agree, that's okay. But, so let me just show you real quick the configuration file. I don't expect you to grab all the details of it. But this is kind of, I'll show you the Freedom Account one because it's the more interesting one. So within the file, you've got project definitions. And it's kind of verbose, as XML tends to be. So this listener thing is basically the interface between the build loop and the reporting application. So you just kind of boilerplate that in there. Just put the build status to a file that the web app reads to show you what the build is doing. Bootstrapping is kind of a step that runs just before checking for changes. So that, let's say you've updated a file that's going to affect how the build runs, and you can kind of bootstrap that file. I've actually got this set up, so it's a Subversion bootstrapper. It's actually going to check out my Subversion project as part of the bootstrapping. Then this says, how do I check for changes? And in this case, I'm looking at both the Subversion repository and in store. And I'll go into the details of what all this stuff means in a minute. And this is your build schedule, and I want to build every minute if I need to. So I'm going to check for changes every minute. This quiet period is what I talked about earlier, where if there's any changes within that period, it's going to wait for things to settle down, just in case you don't get a ton of commits. So this says, oh, I'm just going to run ant to do my build. And I want to generate a log, and I want to merge in my test results into that log so that they show up in my build messages. And then this is how I want to publish my results. And in this case, I just want to send an HTML email to myself when that happens. So that's how you configure this. Like I said, this is wordy. If you were to look at all these other projects, there's a ton of duplication there. And so they actually provide some facilities for removing the duplication. One of the things you can use is something called XML entities, which those of you who know XML are familiar with those. The other is that you can pre-configure any of the plugins in your project, and you can even pre-configure a project. And so what I've actually got is a refactored version of config.xml, where I set up a little XML entity at the top so I can use it. And then up here, this whole section here is pre-configuration. This is all the common stuff that I had to do in my configuration. So I've extracted that to one place. And so if you go in here, you'll notice this project here, all it needs is the basic stuff. It does nothing else. So I just say, oh, I've got a project named that. And it automatically figures out how to do the build. Other ones have a little more to it. This one, oh, I got to look in a store repository too. This one, I want to look in a store repository too, and I want to merge in test results. So I'm using that XML entity I defined at the top. So like I said, I'm kind of glossing over this. I didn't actually refactor the built-in project right off the moment. So my 4 projects now, from this mess from here down to here, has been reduced down to not that much, this much. With the common extracted stuff at the top. So those tools they've added in more recent builds, and it's been really nice because you can get rid of all this duplication. Just say this is what's different about this build. I guess, like I said, I'm glossing over that, but just to show you that they do make it a little better than your stock, really verbose XML. So I'll just talk about that. The other thing there's something called Java Management Extensions, and Cruise Control implements that as well. So I can go to another page here, and the UI for this is really ugly, but I can see here I've got all my projects, and if I want to go force a build of something, or I want to change what the build label is going to be next time, or change any of these properties, I can do that here. So let me start that server that I forgot to start last time. I want to make sure my acceptance test actually passed. And let me just force a build without actually making a change. So I can invoke that from here. And now we're going to get another build. It's actually already started. You can see it back in here. So let's let that finish real quick. It's a pretty quick build. So this time it shouldn't actually die on me, because I actually started fitness this time. Done. There it is. And I didn't get all that spewage up here, and There's also fitness will merge in your fitness, cruise control will merge in your fitness test results as well. I'm actually working on a better version of that for the reporting application, so you can see more details of those, but I don't have that working yet. So that's another one I'm going to submit back to the project when I'm done. So if I refresh this, there's my latest build, and I can see my fit test. What I'm actually adding is a new tab here that will actually show you all your fitness tests as well. Just to tie my two talks together a little bit. So that's what the JMX will do. You can actually go in and force a build, or you can pause the build if you know you're going to be making changes that are going to be breaking something and you don't want it to run for a bit. So you can do all kinds of stuff like that with this kind of remote control thing. So how do we make this work with Smalltalk? In order to check for changes in the store, I needed to, because cruise control is written in Java, I actually had to write a Java plugin for it. And I kind of basically follow the model they do for Subversion. What they do is they make an external call to Subversion, ask it for the changes between two timestamps, and it spits out an XML file with the changes in it that cruise control then parses and then reports as modifications. And so I kind of follow that model with the store, where I shell out to an external program that starts up a VisualWorks image, checks my store repository for changes, uses store for Glorp to do that. Thank you, Alan, for that. It made it a lot nicer than doing it with the regular model, and then reports them back out on standard output by XML. The Java plugin that I wrote parses those and reports those modifications in the format cruise control expects. So that Java plugin is the part that I got integrated into the cruise control project instead. And so if we go back to that build or the configuration file for a minute, you'll see here that I give store a working directory. It says this is where I want you to do what you're doing. This is the script that I want you to run. So the idea is that you write your own script for starting, for running this cruise control image. And this is the repository name, or connection profile as it's called in that code, so that's why this says profile. I do something called a version regex because store version strings are basically free-form text. They can be anything. We adopt some conventions in our shop where we use anything that's mainline as an integral version number, anything that's a branch has a dot in it somewhere. And so we just specify a version regex, and if it's all digits, then it matches our pattern and we care about that version. If it's not all digits, we would ignore that in our automated builds. It means we publish the work in progress code that we don't want on the main build yet or something like that. And this is the name of a file that I use to basically keep me from having to go look at the changes in the store repository twice. There's another step I'll talk about in a minute. So when cruise control runs, and it basically finds all the packages that I want to check and spits out a list of all the latest package version that matches my criteria. When cruise control starts up a build, it kind of grabs a timestamp right up front and says, okay, this build is as of this time. That's to avoid a race condition where it starts a build, but then somebody publishes while the build is happening, and then then it's done the build and it says, oh, well, there's no changes since last time I built, even though there was that period in between where there was a change. So it grabs a timestamp and says, my build is as of this time. So I look for changes as of that time, I check out the code as of that time, and I do the build as of that time. And so it spits out that list of parcels that match that criteria. And then a later step uses that file. This is an optional parameter, we use it for what we do. And then within a particular project, I give it a list of here's the top level packages that I want you to build. And we use prerequisites to pull in everything else we need. So here's an example parcels to build file that got generated by cruise control. So I want all these packages, and they're in order from kind of note, I don't depend on anything else to, I depend on everything else kind of stuff. So if you load the packages in this order, you won't have any unsatisfied prerequisites, essentially. It's in that order. Here's what the storecc.bat file looks like. It just starts up VisualWorks image. Interesting note is you can't use the base image that's in preview because you can't load store into that image because there's some dependencies on tools that aren't in that image. So we have a separate image that starts from visual.am. We load in store for Glorp, and package that up and use that for this part of the process. I do some source file discarding and stuff. And basically, I give it a path to load parcels from, tell which parcel to load, and then pass in all the rest of the arguments that came from cruise control. So a very simple script. I'll give the URL of my blog later, and it has examples of a lot of these scripts on there. I've kind of written all this stuff up on my blog, so it's documentation. Okay, so that's how that part of the process works. The next step is deploying parcels. We do a build-up style where we start from a base image. We have a build for our base image as well that automates loading the base.im, loading a couple things into it, setting arrows, strings, stuff like that, and then running the runtime packager to save that out. And we start that image and then load parcels into it. So part of our build is to load packages from store, save them out as parcels, and that's where that parcel builder file comes in. Like I mentioned, we use prerequisites pretty heavily, and I wanted to show off another little tool that I wrote. Here, this is available in public store where you can get a graph of your prerequisites. So it's not really related to cruise control, but I like this tool too, so I have to show it off. And I have to thank Mark Kovanek and Travis Foods who did a little bit of work to clean it up. Martin did something where I had it was always a horizontal orientation, and Martin made it so that it was smart about whether to choose a horizontal or vertical orientation. It's kind of nice. So it shows you your current package and everything. It depends on your cursor. I didn't do a lot of sophisticated math on it, but it's kind of handy tool to look at the prerequisites. So what Parcel Builder will do, what I was just talking about, is again, we run a little script, and it takes that parcel to build file, connects to store, loads all those parcels, and then saves them out, loads all those packages from store, saves them out as parcels in the directory I tell it to, and then when we run our tests and when we deploy our system, those are the parcels that we deploy. So let me show you the build file that does that. This is ANT, verbose XML again. There's lots of debate about whether ANT is a good use of XML or not, and I think the general consensus these days is it's not. And probably Randall can confirm that for me. I think I've heard him talk about that once or twice. So I have a full build target that cleans, does the build, runs the test, runs the acceptance test, basic stuff. So here's the build step, which is I make a parcels directory, and I shell out and run a little script called parcelbuilder.bat. If this fails, I want to fail my build. Set the VisualWorks environment variable and tell it where I want the parcels to go. And parcelbuilder.bat does the rest of the work. Runs that store image again, loads in parcel builder, tells it what repository I want to connect to, tells it the file to load, so the cruise control generated for me. Basically, this is an optimization step, so I don't have to go recompute which packages I want. I can let cruise control do that for me once and cache it. Just uses a file as a cache. Tell it where to put the parcels, and then tells it to go. So again, this is all documented in package comments and on my blog as well. How to do that. Okay, so that's how we deploy parcels. That's how we do our thing. You could do your builds a different way, but this is the way we do it, and so I've provided tools for those kinds of things. How do you run your SUnit 2 tests? We have another package called Test Logger, and we have a little helper script here that runs our base image. This is the one that we actually ship with our software. Gives it a parcel path and the main parcel to load. Loads Test Logger, tells it where to put the results, and tells it to run the tests. And so in VisualWorks, we have a Test Logger package that basically finds all of the SUnit 2 tests in the image. You could use it for SUnit as well. We use SUnit 2, so that's what I've got built in. And then spits out the results into an XML file. The format of that file is the same as what JUnit uses, because cruise control understands that. So we didn't have to do any extra XSL work to understand those results. And then you get that merged into your build results, and you can see all the details of your unit tests around. And again, we have a way of running our fitness tests that I won't go into today, but you can actually do that as well. It's very similar. You have another script that you run, and this output conversion and that kind of stuff. And that gives you a running build. I didn't show any kind of packaging steps here, although we have those in our system where you kind of deploy what you've actually built. So some links. That top one is, if you're not familiar with the Cincom public store repository, that's where you find out about that. And the next link is the main page for cruise control. Again, the Java part of this is all there. All the other stuff is in public store repository. There's a cruise control package there. There's a parcel builder. There is test logger. Basically all the pieces that I talked about today are all available in public store. So you can go look at those. The VisualWorks specific, unfortunately, for those of you who use something else. And then that last link is to my blog. And again, I've written about this last fall or so, I think September, October timeframe is when I wrote about this. And that's all I have. A quick run through. Any questions? Yes?
How do you determine which prerequisite versions?
We always load the latest one that matches our version regex. Can't remember. I believe that if you have specific version requirements, it will respect those, but I don't remember if it does that or not. We don't typically do that. We just say, you know, this package needs that package, and we assume that the latest one is going to work. We try to keep basically our head of a repository to be what we want to work with, so-called head and other version control systems. So that's how we do it. Peter.
Yeah, does it do stripping of the image as well too?
If you make your automated build do stripping, you can. The one build we have to build up our base deployment image does a little bit of that, but it's a base image already, so there's not much to strip. You can, if you can, actually in 7.6 it's easier to run the runtime packager in an automated fashion, and we do that now. So basically you can make your build do whatever you want to do, whatever it needs to do for your system, you can do that. Any other question here?
Yes. It wasn't clear to me which parts were exactly were cruise control specific and which were your optimization. So forgive me if this is a stupid question, but you for instance had it load the most recent version based on your versioning system, but could that be easily changed to like say blessing level, for instance?
Yeah, actually I didn't show that there is an option for setting the kind of the minimum blessing level that you want to use. It defaults to development, so I didn't actually put that in my XML file, but it is there. You can change your version regex if you have a naming convention that you want to follow. For example, for a while when we were tracking both 7.5 and 7.6, there's a bunch of packages in public store that we used that were 7.6 specific. So we had a version regex that had an optional 7.6 prefix on it to match all those packages. Or for a while there was the RB4XX stuff. You just change your version regex to match that. But there is also a command line option for a minimum blessing level. So if you want to use blessing levels instead, you can do that. And then the one optimization was basically that spitting out that file from cruise control, so parcel builder can load it. But these are three separate pieces that you can kind of use in conjunction to do things like we're doing it, or you can use them separately and just use parts of it. Travis Grates is actually using the parcel builder and test logger part these days, and he's extending them to work with bundles because they don't work with bundles yet, with bundles. And I'm going to be integrating his work as soon as I get a chance here when he's gotten stable. So this will support bundles pretty soon as well. So he's actually using, he's grabbing the parts that work for him and leaving the parts that don't. Away. So they're all kind of separable pieces. Yeah, Peter.
Sorry, this may be a stupid question as well. What's SUnit 2?
It's a different version of SUnit. The Travis wrote a number of years ago when he's still a key. The main, I think he's got several goals for it, but the big win from my point of view is that it basically, rather than keeping actual test case objects around in the browser results, it uses tokens. And so if you've got, you don't have to explicitly mill out big objects that you have as instance variables in your test cases that then don't get released because the tools are hanging on to those test case objects. So basically, rather than remembering the whole test case object that it ran, remember it's just a token and the results of it. So it can show all the feedback in the browser, but it doesn't hang on to the test case object that then hangs on to a whole bunch of garbage that you don't want to hang on to. And there's the integration into the RV is a little different. Let me show you. Yeah, we get this. This is in 7.6, the new test runner that you first want to see because it's not showing everything. It's that. So the little test runner down here is part of SUnit tools. And I've actually got a little extension that I showed off yesterday a little bit that when they can change and save it, it automatically runs my test file. That's also in public store. I did it as a kind of an experiment to see how it felt to have my tests automatically run. People talked about it in some of the XP lists, TDD lists, about every time you make a change, have it run your test automatically. And I actually find I like it a lot more than I thought I would. I thought it would get really annoying. And it's actually kind of cool. But that's all SUnit 2 stuff. It's very similar to SUnit. But people are working on a bridge between the two, so where SUnit 2 is incompatible. There's some menu options for switching back and forth, so I can go click an SUnit 2 test case. And if I had SUnit loaded, I could actually convert this to an SUnit test case instead. Switch back and forth very easily. So that's what that is. Any other questions? Yes.
First is a sanity check. I'm assuming cruise control has a clear case interface.
Yes, there is clear case.
And then also as part of the build process, you had running the tests afterwards, like a verification. So you know what else is available for that, or verification steps?
Whatever you want to do. I mean, it's wide open. It's so pluggable. You can make anything you want be part of your build. Like that build XML file I showed is just what we happen to write in hand. And you can do anything you want. We've got ones that we run tests on our real hardware to report the results. We have a set of fit tests that run against our real hardware, check tests our command shells. I mean, the sky's pretty much the limit.
These are all plugins that are available on Salesforce?
Not always. I mean, anything you do as part of your build is pretty much up to you to script it yourself. But Cruise Control has plugins for calling different kinds of build things like ant and make and any kind of executable and that kind of thing. So actually doing the work that's your responsibility. If you want to report some extra results that don't kind of fit the built-in stuff, you can go add stuff to the XSL style sheets and that to get that information in your builds. There is some documentation about that on Cruise Control. So that's a little less out of the box stuff. Kind of getting the reporting out of there. In fact, that's what I'm doing to get fitness results showing better is doing some XSL stuff. I haven't done before, so stuff like that. I have Gregory to help me with that because he knows that stuff. So yeah, I mean, you can do pretty much anything you can do in an automated build. You can drive it from Cruise Control. In fact, when people talk about starting to use Cruise Control, they say the first step to do is get an automated build that you can run by hand from a command line. And then once you have that, Cruise Control helps you automate the rest of that process. And then if you want to do some better integration with different result formats and stuff like that, then that's Cruise Control. Anything? Yeah, Alan.
Randy, what's next?
The bundle support is the big missing thing for a lot of people, which Travis is taking care of for me, so I don't have to. It works for us. I do find that doing modification checks against store is kind of slower than stuff like Subversion. I don't know how to speed that up really. I can let Alan be my query optimizer or something. I don't know. It's kind of working for us. If we find we're missing stuff, we'll add it. If somebody else wants something added and doesn't know how to do it themselves, I'm more than willing to help and walk people through that. I'll put my references back up in case anybody wants to copy those down. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.